Welcome to another weekly Forex forecast. We are starting as usual on the DXY on the weekly time frame, and we can see we are still sitting here on the low of this bigger structure, and we did not have much progressive price action last week. Going down to the 4-hour time frame, we can see we are building a bigger structure. We did retest here this low and had the sell-off, first continuation. We had a V-shaped recovery here, and we are now building another structure here, potentially to finish the low here, the last run into this low, and that's what I'm looking for next week. I'm looking for price to build this bigger 1, 2, 3 structure, potentially even going into this high here. So as long as price is staying a bit longer in this area here, we might see a slightly larger recovery of the dollar into this liquidity area here before we then see a potential sell-off for the last leg into this low, tapping the low one more time before we then potentially see a turnaround. So that's what I'm looking for early next week. I'm looking for some dollar recovery place, but then overall still I'm leaning more towards dollar short place for this leg in next week. Moving on to Euro US dollar, the inverse picture. In that case here we are on the 4-hour time frame, and here I'm looking for price ultimately to tap into this high one more time, but right now initially I'm looking for the first dollar recovery play. So that would mean a temporary Euro US dollar short going down to the 1-hour time frame. We can see the structure is not perfect. We had here some erratic price action during NFP. A lot of the majority of the early month news are now over, so we might see some more structure and better direction next week. So we have a potential liquidity area here. We have a very small potential base for a bigger 1, 2, 3 structure here. So if I get deliberate price action here during Asia session, if price forms a deliberate structure, a 1, 2, 3 into this weak high here, I would definitely entertain a short in this area, because that would be enough room to manage the trade into this first area of interest, but ultimately into this area here, this bigger liquidity area here, before we then see a potential turnaround for the next leg to the upside. But this trade alone here is more than enough room to manage a trade to the downside. The same goes for Euro US dollar, with the big difference here. If we look on the 4-hour time frame or even on the daily time frame, we are a bit in no man's land here. You can see here we did not tap into any significant area of interest here. We are trading above this high, and we did not really break out with structure. However, I'm still looking for a potential short-term short. It looks very similar going back here to the 1-hour time frame. We have this small area of interest. It's not a very significant high, as you can see, or as you saw on the higher time frame, but we did break past this high in form of a 1, 2, 3. We had an initial reaction, we had the first continuation, then a fairly nice impulsive move to the downside, and are now forming a potential bigger continuation with still enough room to at least this initial structure low, and then potentially closing the gap here, tapping into these areas here before we then might see a bigger turnaround. So that would also be in line with the temporary dollar strengthening before we then see the bigger sell-off. New Zealand dollar, US dollar, very similar. Going to the daily time frame, we can see we are here on a more significant area of interest. This is definitely an area we can see here even in the daily. This is a liquidity area here, so we see some reaction. We had initial sell-off, we then had a bullish high test, and now a confirmed bearish daily candle. However, we did not close on a very strong body, so going down to the 1-hour time frame, but we can see we have some structure here. We had this 1, 2, 3 and then the initial reaction, the first continuation. I'm now looking for the second continuation for a short, at least into this area, preferably to the low of the structure, before we then see a turnaround. This is a nice overall structure by itself, but the fact that we broke already past the area of interest to the left on the second high makes the whole setup less effective than if this would be here. We just broke past the high with the last high of the 1, 2, 3 structure, then that would make the overall setup more effective. But if we get a deliberate structure here on the lower time frame, it's nevertheless still a high quality setup. US dollar Swiss francs on the daily time frame, we are still we have a bit undecided price action. Initially we were looking for longs, but we can see here we have a bearish structure and are in non-progressive price action. It's more corrective price action. So I'm looking for clear price confirmation on the 4-hour at least for a bearish trend continuation. Because here when we are looking on the 4-hour time frame, we were coming here with this initial bull flag continuation, then we broke out, we accumulated more volume, ultimately failed to continue, broke below, formed a nice expanding structure, retested this whole price action here, and you could also argue this is a head and shoulder with left shoulder, head and right shoulder, and we are now going into the next continuation here. It's not ideal because it's basically a correction into a correction, but it's a 4-hour time frame, and if we get a retest of this high here, it's basically already it did what it had to do for price to continue sell off. So, but if I see another retest here, potentially with a 4-hour washout candle, then I would happily entertain a short in this area. However, if we just see price breaking outside this structure here and then forming some form of a smaller 1-hour structure below or just outside this bigger structure in form of a bearish continuation, then I would entertain a short in this area as well, because there's still enough room to entertain a short at least into the previous lows here to the left. US dollar yen, another tricky one on the daily time frame. We can see we are a bit in no man's land now. Price did whatever it had to do. We had this V-shaped recovery, a smaller one than here to a bigger degree, but we still left a small gap to the downside, and we are now forming some form of bearish continuation. However, on the lower time frame, we can see we broke out of the smaller continuation, because price does not necessarily have to go back up here, since we basically fulfilled this V-shaped recovery and had a strong sell-off, but failed to continue here and did not even tap the low. So what am I looking for right now? I'm looking for a temporary long because of this overall failed structure, and looking at that as a bigger 1, 2, 3 expanding or bigger 1, 2, 3 bearish flag. And I'm looking now for a deliberate 1-hour bull flag outside this structure here, this failed short structure, to then entertain a long at least into the highs here. Euro yen on the daily time frame, we can see we are in a very nice momentum run to the upside, and we have this value area here to the left, so it would make sense for price to continue to the upside, tapping this high here one more time, and that's what I'm looking for. Actually, I'm looking here on the 1-hour time frame for a deliberate bull flag continuation structure through this smaller area of interest here to the left for a bullish continuation. Swiss francs yen on the daily time frame, very, very similar. We have at least here a bigger area of interest to the left to close the gap, and we have a value area just a bit more outside. We have this very impulsive move. We had this correction here, which then would make sense for the next leg, bigger leg to the upside. This here is enough volume accumulation to warrant a trade to the upside or a next bigger leg to the upside. So that's what I'm looking for right now on the 1-hour time frame. We do have this high here to consider, this area of interest where we left a gap 2 times and we now are still trading below. So if we see a deliberate 1 hour structure here not tapping the high, then I would entertain a long in this area. However, otherwise we have to see how price reacts on this first smaller area of interest. We might also just see a stronger washout, a break back in, and then a bearish continuation during somewhere into mid next week. Then of course I would change my bias. That would be very, very deliberate price action. Price did enough closing these gaps without tapping into the next higher value area. Canadian dollar yen on the daily time frame, we were looking for shorts for quite some time, and we had this initial bigger structure here, this 1 2 3, then the failed sell-off in this area. We discussed that. We then were changing our bias and were looking for longs in this area. However, we did not get any entry on the 4-hour time frame. I'm still overall looking more for shorts because of the nature of price. We do have this value area here to the left, but we have this small area of interest. We have this liquidity area here where price tapped into it with the bullish high test candle and is now kind of undecided price action. We have a 1 2 3. We did that tap this area in form of structure, and this is more bearish price action overall. However, going to the 1 hour time frame, we can see it's non-progressive here, but that could just be Friday evening. So what I'm looking for is for price to break back into structure, preferably below this low, and forming some form of bear flag continuation to entertain a short in this area. And however, if we see during Asia session a deliberate 1 2 3 1 hour structure in this area, then of course I know the short is off and I'm looking to entertain a long in this area to at least manage the trade into the high, preferably higher like the other yen related pairs. Then we have Sync here on the 4-hour time frame. Better go to the daily time frame. That's very rarely on my watch list, but we can see here we have a low, we have a high, we tapped the high, had a very aggressive initial sell-off, and we had then a bigger area of interest here to the left, the value area, going down to the 4-hour time frame, and we can see we tapped this area in form of a 1 2 3. This was here initially on the second touch, price left the gap and it was a bullish high test. We then fully filled that and had a very nice washout, are now in a bearish momentum run, and going down to the 1 hour time frame, we can see the price seems to actually seems to follow structure, sorry for that, and we have here a first smaller continuation structure. We had this V-shape recovery and are now in a very strong sell-off. That was a nice impulsive move. We still have enough room to the next bigger inflection points, and I'm looking on the 1 hour time frame for some form of a deliberate 1 2 3 bear flag structure to then enter a short in this area. And the last pair is NATGAS, and we are here. We had this on watch 3 weeks ago and were looking for this structure. We retested this low here to the left, had a very aggressive impulsive sell off, and are now volume accumulation, forming a bigger corrective structure or a continuation structure to the downside, and that's what I'm looking for here on the 4 hour time frame. We can see we have here a potential 1 2 3 in the making, the same structure we had on watch 3 weeks ago. It's just a bit more progressed. Now we have an area of interest here, we have an area of interest here, so it's possible for price to tap into these areas here, and we have basically an override area, then the first inflection point, second inflection point, and I'm just waiting to see what price is doing in this area. But overall, it would make sense for price to continue to the downside. When we take the FIB tool here, we can see also we approach the 50% retracement area. So overall, even though the structure seems large in the bigger picture, it's still within proportion for the next bearish continuation. Yeah, that's it. That's my watch list for next week. Thanks for watching. See you next week. Bye bye.